Really wonderful to see everybody's bright faces here. I'm like Nick said, I'm zooming in here from the Hudson Valley, from Terrytown, Britannico Hills. Here we're about only really about 30 minutes north of Manhattan, right on the Hudson. Stone Barn Center is a nonprofit center that has a wonderful farm and education program within a park preserve and an extraordinary restaurant here on site, Blue Hill at Stone Barns, who's been a partner with us since day one. So we work really closely together because we're in such an incredibly populated area around us. Most, Westchester County and New York City general area. We have a huge population, but obviously not a lot of farms. They've been pretty well run out of the area. And, we've come, I think in many ways, the nonprofit really established itself here for the very simple need that people just don't have enough connection to food and farming and nature. So the center, in 2003, we started to build and shape this farm, which was an old dairy and cattle breeding operation, and have turned it into a pretty biodiverse place, and are open to the public, and have done all kinds of work with our community and members, and I think that that's right in line. I was fortunate enough to see Alice Waters just a week or so ago, and she was saying that she thought it might be a good idea to talk to this group. And I think what's happening at the Edible Schoolyard is, really setting an incredible pace for schools and community gardens and education in gardens. Certainly, it's the most important thing that we have the capacity to teach each other in these kind of living environments. They can be productive, and they can be playful, and they can be generative and regenerative and all that. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we do and the ways we go about that. Really to speak to this idea that it takes a community to raise a community, not just our children, that we really do have a responsibility to connect people. All of us, we're all contributors to a food system, and yet so little of us recognize that what our real contribution is as a home to cook for our families, or to garden in our own backyard, or to produce food for other people, or however we look at it. But I don't think there's anyone in the world that does not contribute, especially to this kind of system. What we're saying here is, regenerative system, and in many ways agroecology, where regional and decentralized relationships are what build the food system. So that's what we're working on here. Nick and I were speaking a little bit earlier, and I was reflecting on this past weekend on Father's Day, and thinking of my own sons, who are now 17 and 14 and are well on their way to being adults, and in their own life and everything. And I just think about how grateful I am that I was able to raise them in a space around food and in nature, and with people that love that kind of work. And I was saying that I really do think that we programmed them right. We gave them that foundation, and I hope that we can do that for all the children in our communities here. And I think in many ways, the community gardens and school gardens and even farms have huge roles to play in this, being able to provide those opportunities just to interact. In many ways, farms are so, in some ways, they're foreign to most of us, because they're not something that are in our everyday. And we go to see them, and they're beautiful and they're very interesting, but it's hard to connect to what they really mean to our day. And so the best way to do it is just to find the place that you can really relate, to be able to dig your hands in and get into the garden. And that's kind of easier said than done, right? Because that, in many ways, that's why we have this community here, and why I think probably most of you are on this, because it requires a community. And in fact, agriculture is kind of the foundation of that kind of community settings, that we're sharing ideas and we're sharing resources. And in many ways, that's what regenerative farming is. Nick asked me to kind of just explain the general premise of regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture. And I actually like the term agroecology too, because I'm farming on a large enough area of land that has a big impact socially, sociopolitically, and environmentally, and not just about producing food. By no means is farming restricted to just feeding people, but or at least feeding their tummies, but more feeding their minds and giving people opportunity and access is a huge responsibility of local farms. I would say what we're facing in an industrial agriculture world is that we've lost those particular pieces that I think what we're trying to regain in a good regenerative kind of space. And the term sort of speaks for itself. We just want to be able to close that loop and cycle that. When I think about the term itself, I think that realistically, it's fairly basic. What the basic premise of these systems is that recognizing that your garden itself is a living space, and that the people that are in it are part of that living space. And that requires a few things. One is the soil is that foundation. So no matter what, soil is kind of the thing to be caring for. That is the foundation for the health. So at the very essence of what we're talking about is everybody's eyes should go to that kind of wellspring that is going to give us the health and the system itself in that soil. The other is biodiversity in general, and not just lots of things, but the way things interact. And that requires a fair amount of exercise and fitness. And we can talk about that a little bit, and how, more diversity within the garden and the right approach and the right cycling promotes health. Not unlike in our own days. I often, people who are not super familiar with gardens, or maybe even don't spend that much time in nature, I like to remind them that you're nature, and that actually everything you need to know about nature is something you probably already know about yourself. And that's that, one, it's a pretty balance of exercise and nutrition and rest. And that's a really important thing, is that you can certainly not eat well for a long time. And, we're resilient enough, but over time that starts to diminish you. The same if you don't get rest. For any of you that have raised children, you know what it's like to not get too much rest when they're little. That can sustain for a little while, but then you kind of have to figure it out. And the same with nutrition. So, the gardens are very much the same way. You just have to figure out how to look at those patterns. And the last thing is that what makes a system regenerative is the community itself. In fact, the term sustainability, which is obviously used in so many different ways, it's such a broad word now. But I wanted to say that the concept of sustainable for me is a very human term, and something that requires our inclusion into. It's not like we're trying to make something else sustainable. We're trying to make it sustainable for us. And that's a really important thing that requires, it's not just making it work, it's making it work and loving it while we do it. And recognizing that things like just the general joy of working in your space is the beginning of real sustainability. Is that when that's the thing to cultivate, is just care, love, and curiosity. Right? The garden itself, I mean, I could say I've been farming my entire life. I farmed in a lot of different places around the country. I'm just kind of constantly curious. That's what keeps driving me forward in this practice. Farming is a great practice, and I've had decades of experience, trial and error, and really testing stuff out and questioning what I'm doing and being questioned by the group of people that are around me and all that stuff. You know, our team is very adventurous and looking to try to do different things and try different varieties. And, you know, for that, we've kind of set this in our own interest. We're doing this. And so all of our community that comes and visits the farm, whether it's community gardens in the city or it's our other farmer friends upstate that are engaged with us, or it's our members in the local suburb around us. The reality is that it doesn't really matter. You can go so small. Anything, a potted plant in your window is enough to get you curious. It's enough to give you that chance. You don't have to have a big garden or field. But most importantly, you don't have to do it alone. In fact, that's actually a really important tenet of, I think what you guys are doing here is learning together, sharing ideas, sharing practices and experiences. And something I continue to learn as I work with our community is why it's so important to have small farms in your local community. You know, we're producing food, and there's a certain degree of food security by having local farms where you are. Again, production is always the first thing that comes to mind, I think, when you think about a farm operating. But more importantly, farmers have great resources to share and experience to share. You know, we work very closely and have worked very closely with our communities, schools, and community gardens in the city and around our local area, and our local home gardeners. At first, by just providing resources, compost and transplants and seeds and advice. But now more than ever, especially as the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was really stuck at home and so many more people really wanted to garden, it spurred this whole kind of revolution in some ways. Of course, starting a garden yourself you have to test and try, and often can lead to some, you know, pretty major fails and, you know, discouragements and that sort of thing. And that's why it's been really valuable for us to create programs that sort of allow our members and community to subscribe with us. And so one of the programs that have developed out of this that kind of goes beyond just sharing plant material and that sort of thing, not unlike the way we would do a subscription for a CSA or vegetable share or meat shares and things like that. But we do garden kit shares, and we give our community a basic template of a recipe. Well, I call it a recipe. It's just a basic garden plot setup. And annually, we have members that reapply to it. And throughout the growing season, we provide flats of transplants and starts all in our timing. Because, of course, you know, we have the experience. We're growing lots of successions, hundreds of varieties of plants. We're doing all kinds of trials and evaluations. We're getting feedback and surveys from our chefs and local public for all these years. So we know what works in our area, and we know how to test and trust and push against that stuff. So by extending that same kind of it's almost citizen science, but it's actually a little bit more organic than that, this kind of regenerative practice of sharing information and sharing plant material. And then through the course of the summer, we have, you know, multiple pickups for, say, the very early spring season setups and main spring crops, midsummer replacement successions, and then fall plantings for winter cropping. And then throughout the season, we have a number of different workshops that we set up that all the 125 members that are in this particular program, family members will will call in or come to the farm for a workshop or something like that. But what's been amazing is that they all share with each other too. And that's been great. So I think, one of the silver linings of these past couple of years is that we went from everybody kind of acting autonomously and buying transplants from our nursery setting and things like that, and trying to do it all their own. And maybe one of the better things about Zoom is that people are able to connect and share about these kind of ideas. And I think it's a trend that will hold, because people are feeling more empowered and more encouraged to be able to do this, whether you're in your own backyard in the suburb or sharing these ideas in a community garden to try to help the people around you. So I think this can work at a school, certainly. It can work in your backyard, it can work at the community garden, and it can even work on the farm in the way that we get a lot of local members as volunteers and interns and folks that really want to dig in. So maybe I think I'll leave it there for a second, see if there's any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack. Just before this, we had our opening session and we welcomed everyone, including having them write some of their goals and what they dream of for their students. And I wanted to share one or two of those here. And then we'll see if some folks want to share any questions that they have in the chat. But in the session just before this, somebody wrote that they hope that their students can connect to the land and the environment around them, understand that the land gives us everything, and that we need to take care of everything we raise, use, and grow to be sustainable. And then we also had some folks write some really specific things, like, I hope to learn more about how to use cover crops to nourish the soil. I hope to cultivate a local sustainable food system. I hope to help my community design sustainable food growing systems for their own and to share with their own community. And I guess while we're waiting for folks to start populating some questions in the chat, I wonder if any of those reflections that participants offered spark anything for you.
Well, I think the most important thing is just to, acknowledge how important it is just to take an action. The wonderful thing I've learned about farming is that you have to do it. You just have to make a mistake. I was saying earlier, I've been farming at Stone Barns for nearly 20 years and a life before that of my own family farm and other work in places. And there was always this thought in my mind in my late teens and early 20s where all I really wanted to do is just see these theories work. I just wanted to see what I was hearing and imagining and reading about, how this can work, how there is actually a way to be mutualistic with our communities, a way to help each other, a way to grow, a way to care for nature and ourselves at the same time. Not do this over here and then do this over here. I just wanted to see that. I wanted to see that for our kids. And, the only way you can do it is just to keep at it. You just have to keep trying. And another thing that I guess I would say about that is, while I have been the director of this organization and the farming and all the things that have happened here with an incredible team of administrators and educators around me and farmers, it's a community. And the reality is there's no real dictation to this kind of thing. There are just principles and a basic set of ethics that you just have to keep holding on to. The fact that you have to trust that cooperation is better than doing it yourself, which might seem like a pretty simple thing to say, but to be perfectly honest, most of us probably would just prefer to do it ourselves because it feels easier. But the reality is you got to work with your community, you got to work with each other in these spaces. That's the natural way to go about it. I think that actually having that general philosophy in the work actually helps to encourage the decision-making process. What should I do about this? How should I go about problem solving, this issue, this pest, this soil problem, or something like that. For us, part of looking at regenerative is the fact that we want self-generating, self-renewing systems to be in place, and you have to trust that that is something that can happen, but it won't just happen over time immediately. It won't just happen by putting soil in a pot and growing something. You can't call that regenerative. The reality is it just takes time to show that. And I think that's a really important thing to encourage everyone is just perseverance and as many opportunities for the group as a whole to participate in the decision making and to share ideas, because that's really what it's about. And I think what generates the most health and the most caring environment for us is when the team all feels like they're contributors to what's happening. There is no job on the farm that is not essential. It doesn't matter what, everybody chooses their thing. We're mixing systems and everybody is kind of adding in. And I think that's a really important culture to have in place in the garden, especially because in the sort of outside world, we go against the grain often. So the garden becomes a place for us to practice kindness and practice cooperation and practice observation, which is often overlooked. Just giving people time to tune in with plants and tune in with soil and not feel like everything has to be coming from person to person. This is about creating a bond with the natural world in a way that is regenerative. I don't know if I'm keeping up with all these questions here, but maybe you want to field a couple for me, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I actually have one of my own that's coming up for me, coming off of what you were just saying and I'm going to jump the line because I'm here and seeing in a way. When I visited Stone Barns, one of the things that struck me was just the overwhelming sense of organization in the space and how neat and organized and functional all of the systems were. And as you're talking about this being a really deeply collaborative and needing to be a deeply collaborative thing, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you translate those values and principles of regenerative agriculture into systems that are enacted by such a large team of folks, of just what that system building looks like, because your systems are on point.
Well, thank you for saying that. That is a high compliment. In some ways, it's sand art. That's the thing about gardens. It's just you put it in, it's alive, and sometimes it's gone. And it also can accumulate, and you don't know what's going to accumulate, but you have to be aware, and you have to be able to recognize the purposes of things. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but I'll say on the side, we manage about 500 acres of pasture within about 1,500 acre park preserve here. It's a state park and it's protected. It's a lot of open land. And we have a conservation plan, agroecological plan with the state of New York to manage this land over the next 50 years. Our cattle and sheep and goats and everything, we're managing them over these large pieces of ground. And part of the initial conversation around that is not to use the land for the sake of production as much as the first point is to find the ecological service for these animals. I think it may be a little easier to talk about an animal for a service because there is a sort of charisma about an animal. But I would say all the plants, they have purpose. They have actual service and relationships. So I think that helps to maybe get to the answer to what you're saying is that, first of all, this is a practice, right? Which means that every little thing, all the way that you stand and hold the hoe, the way that your hands go into the soil around a plant, how you look at the color of the plants that are there, all of these things can get better all the time just through practice. Your understanding of the health of a plant because of the hue, your capacity to stand upright while you cultivate down a row, all of these little things that to say that weeding in some ways is demeaning or like the lowest thing you can do in the garden. To me, it's my favorite thing to do. I love it. I just absolutely love to weed it. And I like it because it's just this, it's such a simple thing, but it's a practice. And you use this instrument, whichever your choice is. And if you're really good at it, you actually do have a choice of what you want to use, because you have a style, you have a flow, and you kind of dance with it a little bit, and it's comfortable. You're upright, or you're bending at the waist, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that part of this thing is just recognizing all of the little things. As far as keeping the place tidy, that shows how much people care and how responsible they really are. I mean, the reality is keeping your tools sharp and your handles oiled and your rows straight and your beds clear. All of those little actions, they show care. And I hold that really high among my team. And I think it's important to understand that there's a beginning and a middle and an end to every activity. And that's the setup, the action, and the breakdown and put away. And it's good to practice that with everything and to give yourself the time you need to do those things. Like I said at the beginning, the thing about diversity or biodiversity is that it's not just about a lot of things. It's about the constellation. It's about the ensemble of things and how they play together. They contribute to each other. And so finding those pieces, I definitely have my team when I come up, I sort of bring something new to the team and want to push it. And they'll say, why do you always think that adding another thing makes things simpler? Often that thought for me is that there's this piece that is just missing, that's like closing that waste loop or putting this thing to best use, or really filling this gap of time that doesn't feel like it's being used properly, or like, it's sort of like finding the hidden farm. That was a term I used to use quite a bit, actually, was look at the garden. It's not just about the beds, it's about the edges and the fence and that little spot that you don't look at because it's sort of shrubby or whatever, that it's part of the farm, it's part of the system. And so all it takes is a little bit of attention and some identification, and it becomes a contributor to the system. So that's definitely a big part of the philosophy as the team, and I think it gives everybody a lot of pride in what they do.
Thank you for that answer. There's a question here from Rory, which is, did your farm and your work begin with a clear mission? How has that driven the ship? Or have you adjusted and become the mission as you go?
Both. I would say when I think back to the very beginning, the mission was both very clear, but also naive. It was just about connecting people. So from that respect, yeah, sure. You want to connect people as authentically as possible to land and food and sort of the empowerment of cooking and eating, and how important it is to appreciate beauty and to appreciate flavor and to appreciate our senses in relationship to food and farming. So that's always been a part of it. We have had multiple eras within this organization, and to focus on different things for many years, we ran farm camps that were great. We transitioned out of that. We had years where there were 60,000+ kids coming to the school coming to the farm in a school year, which I thought was great, except that the more we did that, the more it started to strike me that I started to remember what it was like when I was on a field trip. And I remember less about what I actually did and more about the bus ride and stuff like that. And so what I would really like, and I think is really valuable, is commitment and consistency and return. That's what really that's one of the sort of tenets of this, is how do you get people to really commit and stay consistent with the system that's there. So you have to create program. And we had apprentice programs for many years. I've had approximately 100 apprentices that have worked for me over the years, and I've trained. And within our team, some of them still work with me, and others have gone on to start their own farms, and others have started food businesses. And great to see, but also I kind of aged out of that too. I actually was longing for a real long-term perennial team and not just apprentices. And so now I'm building our farming platform of more long-term, longer-term farmers. And because I want the artisans to come in, and I've recognized that farmers can't do this on their own. It doesn't matter how good they are at this sort of thing. We need to recognize that those local artisans and all the food producers and processors and the infrastructure that is in our communities the equity of farming needs to be integrated into all these other activities. And so our farm continues to become more of a experimental platform in some ways for artisans and farmers to work together in these spaces. And so that's kind of the direction we're going, more of that, more academic and research partners, more ecological partnering. We do a huge amount of data collection on the greater landscape, and have a GIS program that actually is accessible by a lot of outside farms and researchers and that sort of thing, that has given us a new kind of foundation. Same premise, how do you restore, or maybe even restore isn't the right word, it's hard to say. How do you encourage the establishment of regional, local, decentralized, and highly diverse food culture? That's where we're going, because to be honest, I love training farmers, but it's hard to send a farmer off the farm and send them out into the world and know that there's no cold storage space, or there's no co-pack or things like that. There's not enough there. So I like the idea of continuing to focus on that, the network of food systems and that sort of thing, with recognizing also that farmers are not just growing food, but are entrepreneurs in their own right, and are part of our communities, not just as producers, but as artists and business people and stewards, and all the other good things that if you put your mind to while you're farming, you can be pretty supportive of the rest of your community.
I'm hearing that answer, Jack, and wanting to weave it in with a couple of the questions that we have in the chat here. I think one of the things you're noting is that we're looking to farmers, and as you're training farmers and building the next generation of farmers, we're asking them to think about how they're going to solve systems issues that are somewhat out of their control as an individual farmer. And one of the questions that connects to that here is somebody asking, how do we create and continue to grow nutrient-dense food for an ever-growing population when land prices are at an all-time high and there's a low interest in youth wanting to become agricultural entrepreneurs? And then we also have a question here around, how does Stone Barns work to increase outreach to communities that don't have access to nature and high-quality produce? And so I think, to me, I'm kind of weaving those two questions together, because they're both about these large systemic issues that, as participants in the food system and change makers in the food system, we're thinking about. And I know it's not always within the direct sphere of influence of you as a farm director, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on those.
Well, certainly. I mean, such a big struggle and hurdle here is, we need more people involved in food culture. That's really what we're talking about here. not just about more farmers. We need to have more empathy within our food system and with our local food system. And that's directly related to food security and environmental security and socio-political aspects of our communities, is that we have to all want this. And that often what makes someone want this comes from very different places. So I'll try to address some of those things that you were asking about. In terms of land, we're in one of the most expensive places to live in the country, maybe just including you also, which would be another area out there. It's very expensive to live. Now, no one can buy farmland unless they are independently wealthy or something and farm here. That's why we have a nonprofit land managing this. But also that we farm on a park preserve. And part of what I'm working on is to, as we have well established here, plans, I'll explain about the way the park preserve works is I have a basic license agreement that gives me the right and the park the right to cooperate and farm on this land. And that's a very basic contract that most nature conservancies and California state lands or whatever, there are agreements like that exist, but rarely are there good conservation plans that they're building, agroecological plans or things like that. The more we work on it, the more we realize that actually there's tons of land. There is actually a lot of land that can be accessed and farmed, whether you need to own it or not. The important thing is that the farmers themselves are being recognized for the fact that they are actually improving that land, especially if they're regenerative farmers. The inherent connection to this is that as consumers, when we hear organic or something like that, or local farms, we inherently expect those farms to be doing better for pollinators and for habitat and for soil and for water and carbon and communities. So that becomes, unfortunately, a very different ask than what we're asking for from a grocery store, because the cheap food comes at an expense that we've not yet been able to quantify. We still are trying so hard to figure out how to quantify the degrading of society and the degrading of our ecology. But we don't know how to do that. We really don't. We're not good at that. Instead, we have a subsidized kind of food system. So there's a lot for us to learn together. Shared use of land and stewardship, farming on public lands, on land trust lands, on preserved lands, with the right agreements and the mutual relationships, that requires work, and it requires a number of different stakeholders to participate to make that happen. You have to want to do that, and not just me, but everybody in my community has to want that. And that takes a little bit of work. It takes showing up to meetings. It takes stepping out of my usual community and to meet people of local government or state or whatever that needs to happen. Just because that's part of what it takes to be a good citizen and participate. I think the same is probably true for for me, the land access thing is a little bit more right in my face because it's like literally directly around me. But our communities also, what we found in working with the local, first of all, working with the local community gardens everywhere from immediately around us to down in the Bronx and Brooklyn, is that these gardens have been happening for decades. They're well established. They have great communities of people managing them. They're very talented. There's all kinds of cultural relationships and varieties and things that they're growing and use. And community gardens are being used for so much more than just growing food. Kids being born there and kids being taught and families getting, business organizations gathering and planning and movements taking place in these community gardens. They're so valuable. So for us, it was just all I really wanted to do was just say, well, what's easy for us? When we started to make more connections to the community gardens, it's like, what's easy for us, but impossible for you? We have these great greenhouses and we're doing all this plant propagation. We always have extra. Just making that plant material available was a first start. We produce tons of compost and it's very high quality. So sure, that's a great thing for us to be able to share and participate. And that was kind of the way that's the way we start a lot of these relationships. It's just a little bit of information share. Certainly as a nonprofit, there's always that sort of looming thing where, or certainly I'm really cognizant of, is that I don't like the idea of some organization coming in and trying to save the day. I really believe that we have a particular set of resources that maybe people just don't even know are accessible to them. And that once that dialogue starts, you navigate that. And if they want to use our space to convene and bring their group away from the gardens, so that's another thing that's happened, is that, there are lots of different communities and factions within the city, say, for example, that don't generally find common ground to work together, but they should. Same for farmers. The reality is there's a lot of autonomy out there, way more autonomy out there than good community action. And so the organization, our space itself, is just beautiful and so to make it accessible for people to come in and convene, just to meet and talk about their issues, has been pretty successful too. And like I said, it requires very little, perceivable energy from us, but the reality is just the availability of that kind of thing has made a huge difference. Sometimes our heads are down and we're working away and solving for something like, you kind of miss the obvious. So it's worth kind of just looking up a second at what you have and what of that you can share.
Jay, I really appreciate that approach to resource sharing and to not having it be, this putting your organization up on a pedestal or saying, we're going to come in and save or nurture yours, but it's just that we're both doing our own thing and we have different assets and resources and things that we can share with one another. I think that's really beautiful. We are coming up to 3:45, which was the slated end time here. I do just want to open it up and see if anybody has one kind of final question they would want to ask to bring us home. Or Jack, if there's anything that you'd like to say just to wrap us up here.
Well, just thank you for letting me speak to you guys. I really think if this kind of program, I hope that it gives you the confidence and the network to be more successful at what you do with your communities. I think that this is like great work. Obviously, working with kids, working with gardens, the combination of that, there couldn't be a better place to nurture and to teach, and not just them, but for you. Remember that's part of this, is part of us growing in these kind of situations and creating environments for that sort of thing. There was a good question I guess I would close with, is just, have you seen change happen over the last 30 years? I love that question. So much. I've seen so many things grow. And that just continues to give me more encouragement. I mean, think of it this way. The reality is, like, everything, all of our stuff, all of our things depreciate, but all the living things continue to appreciate. So when you can put a person in that kind of environment, they can begin to appreciate and recognize those things that are around them, that we are not tied to all of our things. And I think that's a really great, I have learned that. I've seen that. What's changed is just, I've seen so many things grow. And I'm definitely, I would say, I'll invoke Eliot Coleman, who's one of my teachers, that would always say, he's junior partner to nature. I like that, because, we just learn. We're just in awe and learning from this space, and, in some ways driven by how giant the potential is here. But just, don't get bogged down by the fact that there are, it may, sometimes people say this, how are you going to change the world? Do you think this sort of thing is really going to change the world or solve our problems? And I would just say, it doesn't I mean, it may sound cold. I don't really mean this. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that we're trying to make change within our communities and that is an important thing, is that it might be an impossible thing to say that we're going to save, we don't need to save the planet. We just need to work with the people around us in the most productive way. And that starts with this kind of stuff, just giving ourselves the opportunity to learn from each other and to pass that knowledge on to kids and families and anyone who's really curious, anyone who's curious about getting into this. And if they're not curious, just give them the opportunity to get their hands in the soil, realize that a carrot might have been growing there and that a worm is not a dangerous thing. You know, all those little bits. That's what I've seen change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jack. I'm going to make it possible for people to come off of mute here, just so we can give Jack a verbal thank you and a round of applause. And really, we appreciate you sharing your wisdom and perspective with us so much. So join me in giving Jack a big thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job.
Very important.
Oh.
Thank you.
I wish that happened at every Zoom. Well, thank you too. Thank you so much. It's great. Congratulations for doing this all together. You probably all had to, you know, change your world and take time. You took the effort to get into this program. So congratulations, you guys. Wish you all the best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edible Schoolyard.
Yes. And we hope to see everyone tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We'll be having a session on exploring garden classrooms and talking about some of the infrastructure and systems that we use to organize our garden classroom. Thanks again, Jack, and thank you everyone for coming out today. We'll see you tomorrow.
Everybody.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.